The laughter at Thanksgiving felt colder than the air from the rattling vent, each chuckle bouncing off antique china as if I weren't there. I'm Elliot Cranford, 48, an internal controller who kept gripping a smooth leather folder, its brass key cool against my palm, just to stay grounded. Ever had a family dinner where every smile cut a little deep? The laughter rolled around the polished dining room like a loose coin, bright and metallic, impossible to ignore. Calder's chuckle came first, that booming, performative sound he uses when he knows people are watching. It sliced right through the clatter of forks on porcelain, louder even than the grandfather clock ticking by the entryway. I sat there, hands folded neatly in my lap, while the jokes spun around me like a slow carousel. They weren't just amused by my apartment, by my choice to live alone in a one-bedroom on the South Side. They were laughing at me, at the version of me they'd chosen to see small, stubborn, and in their minds stuck. I kept my eyes on the plate, tracing the faint pattern of blue flowers circling the antique china, one of Ophelia's proud possessions. A faint thread of jazz from the adjoining sitting room floated in the soft brush of cymbals, mingling with the muted hum of conversation. I felt the edge of the leather folder pressing against my ribs, beneath the coat draped over the chair. My fingers shifted against the tablecloth, a subtle movement before I let my hand rest on my thigh. The folder, the key, the proof of a life they didn't know existed. It stayed silent, just as I did. Ophelia, perched at the other end of the table, tilted her head and smiled that tight, glassy smile she saves for cutting remarks. "It's almost charming," she said, cutting into her sweet potato casserole with precision, like a college dorm for someone who never quite moved on. Her words floated across the table, silky but edged like glass. A few chuckles rose from the cluster of cousins and uncles, those half-curious, half-judgmental spectators who never miss a chance to nod along. Someone muttered something about beanbag chairs, another about instant noodles, and the laughter bloomed again, sharp as the chill coming through the drafty window by my side. I lifted my cider, now lukewarm, and took a measured sip. The apple tang hit my tongue with a mild sting, not enough to mask the taste of pity lingering in the room. I let my gaze drift not at the people, but at the details. The faint reflection of chandelier light on Ophelia's wineglass, the way Lowell, my father, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, rubbing at a spot on his napkin without looking at anyone. "Greta." My mother caught my eye once quickly, then looked down at her plate, as though it held an answer. No one asked me how work was going, or if I still liked what I did. They preferred the picture they'd painted a man clinging to the edges, quietly floundering. Calder leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking beneath him, and stretched his arms as if he were addressing a courtroom. "He loves a stage, especially one where he already knows the verdict. You know, Elliot," he began, his voice dipping into that mock concerned register, "there's no shame in asking for help. You could move back in here for a while, learn some structure, get a taste of how stability works. Honestly, it might be your only shot at pulling yourself out of whatever rut you've decided to live in." The words landed with a soft, collective exhale from the others, a mix of agreement and discomfort. I tapped my finger lightly against the side of my chair, once, twice the motion barely audible over the soft scrape of utensils and the muted hum of the room. The chandelier above flickered faintly, just for a moment, as if the house itself were sighing along. I didn't meet Calder's eyes, not yet. I let the moment stretch, let the room breathe around the weight of his suggestion. Outside, a wind pushed at the eaves, rattling a branch against the window. The grandfather clock chimed another note, marking a minute I'd never get back a beat to file alongside the dozens of similar dinners and similar jabs over the years. I placed my cider back down with care, letting the soft thud of glass against wood cut gently through the murmurs. Beneath the coat draped over my chair, my hand found the familiar outline of the folder. My fingertips traced the cool brass of the key through the leather, the metal grounding me more than any words could. I could feel the tension in my shoulders ease just a fraction as I pressed my thumb along the spine of the folder, a quiet reminder that I wasn't the person they thought I was, not anymore. I lifted my gaze finally and offered Calder a small, measured smile, one that didn't quite reach my eyes, but said enough. And I said nothing at all. The road home was empty enough to feel like it belonged only to me, a ribbon of dark asphalt glistening beneath the low glow of my headlights. The mist hung thick, catching every beam and turning the air into shifting silver curtains. The smell of roasted turkey clung stubbornly to my coat, mingled with the cheap, spicy cologne Calder favors, as if the dinner itself had followed me here. I rolled the window down a crack, hoping the cold air would scrub it away, but the scents settled deeper, clinging the way tonight's laughter had light on the surface, heavy underneath. By the time I pulled into the gravel lot behind my apartment complex, the fog had crept closer, swallowing the street lamps, until only faint halos floated in the dark. My one-bedroom sat on the second floor, the single porch light flickering like it couldn't decide whether to work or give up for the night. I climbed the narrow stairs slowly, hand-brushing the chipped wooden railing, feeling the grain bite into my palm. Inside, the apartment greeted me with the soft hum of the old refrigerator and the faint, muffled hum of classical music drifting from my neighbor's unit. The golden desk lamp on my table cast a tired light, more glow than brightness, painting the corners in amber shadows. I shed my coat, tossing it over the back of a chair, and set my keys on the counter. The room smelled faintly of coffee grounds and old paper scents that made this place feel more like mine than any sprawling house ever could. On the desk sat my chipped coffee mug, held together at the handle with a strip of yellow tape. I picked it up carefully, cradling it with both hands. The tape was peeling slightly at one edge, and I pressed it back down with my thumb more out of habit than necessity. That mug had outlasted jobs, apartments, and relationships, and every time I held it, I remembered why I kept things simple. Thrift wasn't desperation for me. It was choice. Resilience had its own kind of beauty, even when it wasn't pretty. As the kettle hissed and clicked behind me, my phone buzzed on the table. A new email notification, the bolded subject line sharp against the screen. Final escrow confirmation. Mansion transfer available for pickup. 9:00 a.m. Tomorrow. The glow from the screen lit up the desk, washing over the mug in my hand, and for a moment the two objects, the peeling taped ceramic and the pristine digital announcement of an $8 million estate, sat side by side, equal in weight. My lips curved at the corner, just a fraction. Not out of pride, not even relief. Just a quiet recognition that both belonged to me and neither defined me. I sat on the edge of the couch, sipping the coffee slowly once it was ready. The warmth seeped through the mug into my fingers, steadying me, anchoring me after the brittle performance of the evening. My thoughts drifted unbidden to winters years ago. 2016. The first year I started keeping construction ledgers late into the night, double-checking figures until my vision blurred. 2017, when I bought my first small patch of land on the outskirts quietly, without telling anyone, not even my parents. Back then, Lowell would talk over dinner about his own father's advice. Never buy what you can't carry in your hands, and Greta would hum softly as she ladled stew into bowls, her way of keeping peace between us when talk of money grew tense. I remembered those meals not for the words spoken, but for the pauses, the soft weight of being together, before life began pulling us apart. I leaned back, letting my head rest against the wall, and stared at the faint reflection of the desk lamp in the window pane. The city beyond was a blur of shadow and fog streetlights smudged into soft orbs. The email still glowed on my phone screen, dimming and brightening again, as if urging me to acknowledge it. I picked it up, read it once more, and set it face down. My fingers tightened on the mug, the ceramic warm against my palm. Not for revenge, I murmured into the still air, the words almost lost beneath the low hum of the fridge. For peace. The words lingered there, gentle but firm, as I let the heat of the coffee sink into me. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor's door shut softly, followed by the shuffle of feet and the faint smell of someone's late-night toast drifting through the vents. The apartment, modest and quiet, felt like a cocoon rather than a cage, despite what Calder and Ophelia thought. This was the space where I'd made every decision that mattered, where every ledger line, contract, and call had built a future they couldn't imagine. My phone lit up again, this time with a different name. Calder. The screen pulsed his name glowing in that cool, unfeeling font, as if the device itself knew the weight of it. The kettle clicked off behind me, steam curling in the dim light, as I watched the screen flash once, twice. My thumb hovered above the accept button, the coffee warming one hand, while the other hesitated. I let it ring twice more, then pressed accept, bringing it slowly to my ear. His voice came through low and measured, but with that undertone of command he can't help but carry. "We need to talk. About the family's future. Tomorrow." I didn't answer right away. The hum of the fridge, the faint strings from next door, and the muted whisper of steam rising from my cup filled the silence. I glanced once at the face-down email, then at the mug in my hands, and finally at the soft glow of the lamp on the table. "Tomorrow," I said, finally, voice steady, and hung up. The rain hadn't stopped since dawn, a steady curtain that softened the edges of every streetlight and sign in central Austin. By the time I pushed open the door to Holt's Coffee House, the damp air had crept through my jacket, and the little brass bell above the frame gave its familiar chime, thin but welcoming. Inside, the warmth hit slow like a blanket that needed a moment to wrap itself around me. The wood-paneled walls darkened with years of polish, and time glistened faintly under the soft overhead bulbs. A few patrons sat scattered among the worn tables, their quiet conversations blending into the muted hiss of the espresso machine. I paused to shake the rain from my sleeves before making my way toward the back, where Samuel always preferred to sit close enough to the window to hear the rain, far enough from the counter to avoid the chatter. Samuel was already there, one broad hand wrapped around a steaming mug, the other tapping a slow rhythm on the tabletop. His eyes, sharp, despite the years etched into his face, lifted as I approached, and a knowing smile broke the stillness.
"You look like a man who's been chewed up by a holiday,"
he said, voice low, warm, and edged with humor. I slid into the seat across from him, the chair groaning softly under my weight, and exhaled the kind of breath I didn't realize I'd been holding since Thanksgiving night. "Chewed up," is one way to put it, I said, curling my fingers around the empty cup the barista had set in front of me. Steam rose from the black coffee, tracing ghostly patterns in the light. I told him about the dinner, the barbed jokes, the sidelong glances. Calder's offer dressed up as charity. Ophelia's little digs about my apartment as if she were describing a shelter. Samuel didn't interrupt, just nodded occasionally, his gaze fixed not on me, but on the rain-streaked window behind me, as though he could see the whole scene replayed there. When I finished, he lifted his cup, took a measured sip, and set it down with deliberate care.
"You've done the work, Elliot,"
he said, fingers resting lightly on the saucer.
"Built something solid piece by piece, while they were too busy keeping score on things that don't matter. Don't let their noise push you into proving a point you don't need to prove."
I traced the rim of my cup with a fingertip, watching the condensation bead and slide down. "The mansion deal closes this week," I said finally. $8 million. Paid for papers signed tomorrow. They don't know. They think I'm one step away from sleeping on someone's couch. Samuel's eyes shifted to me, steady and unblinking. Then let them think he said. For now. You don't need to brandish it like a trophy. Actions, Elliot, not anger. When the time comes, you let the facts speak. Not for revenge, not to humiliate. For clarity. He leaned back the chair, creaking under his weight, and reached into the inside pocket of his weathered blazer. From it, he drew out a small, cracked pocket watch, its silver casing dulled with age, and a faint fracture running across its face. He placed it on the table between us, the faint tick, barely audible over the soft patter of rain against the glass.
"Not every broken thing needs fixing,"
he said, his voice gentler now.
"Some are reminders of where you've been, of what's worth carrying forward."
I hesitated before picking it up. The metal was cool, almost cold, and heavier than I expected. The hairline crack caught the light, a thin silver vein across its surface. As I held it, a memory surfaced unbidden, the way my father used to polish his own watch at the dinner table. Slow circular motions, while my mother hummed, and the soup simmered on the stove. The smell of stew and wood polish, the sense of a world that felt whole, even if only for those brief moments. The rain picked up, tapping more insistently on the window. I closed my hand around the watch, feeling the faint thrum of its movement against my palm, as if it were alive in its quiet persistence. Samuel nodded toward my coat, draped over the chair. "Keys can open doors, Elliot, but they can also close chapters. Choose carefully when you hand them over." I looked at him, the watch pressing into my fingers, and nodded once. The steam from my coffee curled upward, dissolving into the warm air, and for the first time in days, I felt my shoulders ease. Samuel didn't offer any more words. He didn't need to. We sat there a while longer, letting the rain and the low murmur of the cafe fill the spaces where words weren't needed. My phone buzzed against the table, breaking the quiet. The screen lit up with a new email, the subject line stark against the Glow Mansion deed, and keys, ready by end of week, coincides with family dinner. The message pulsed once before the screen dimmed again. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I let my gaze drift back to the watch in my hand, its steady ticking somehow louder than the rain. Samuel's eyes followed mine, his expression calm but firm. "Timing," he said softly. "It's everything." I nodded, slipping the watch into my pocket, feeling its weight settle beside the leather folder I still carried. The bell above the cafe door chimed faintly as another patron left the gust of cool air stirring the smell of roasted coffee beans. I wrapped both hands around my mug and took a long, slow sip, watching the window fog slightly from my breath, the rain blurring the world outside into a soft watercolor haze. Calder's office smelled like leather and stale ambition. The LED lights were cold, the HVAC hum constant, making the place feel like a showroom. He drummed his fingers on the polished desk, eyeing the folder I'd set down for just a second too long. He picked it up, waving it like it weighed nothing. "What is this, Elise?" "A tax notice. Thin paper for a thin life." He smirked, his gold cufflinks flashing. "Come work with me, Elliot. Real job, real paycheck. Time to drop the act before people stop asking if you're okay." My phone buzzed. A voicemail from Ophelia, no doubt plotting to paint me as stingy at the PTA fundraiser. Calder watched my reaction, his smile growing. "Perception is everything. Right now you look like a man sinking." I slid the folder back toward me, feeling the brass key through the leather. I met his eyes.
"You'll understand soon enough."
My voice was calm, even. Another buzz, this time from my lawyer. "All documents cleared. Mansion handover set for Thanksgiving morning." The screen's glow reflected on Calder's perfect desk as I turned for the door, the folder tucked under my arm. The key pressed cool against my ribs, a steady reminder that this conversation, like Calder's office, wouldn't matter for long. Thanksgiving was coming. Everything would change. By the time dessert reached the table, the laughter had gone brittle, all the softness gone. Calder cleared his throat like a man ready to pass judgment, his red cheeks gleaming in the flickering firelight. The crackle from the fireplace didn't warm the air. If anything, it only made the weight of the room heavier, as if each pop and spark punctuated a list of unspoken accusations. Forks tapped softly against porcelain plates as slices of pecan pie were passed, but no one was savoring the sweetness. The room had turned into a courtroom, and I was the defendant, sitting silently with a chipped coffee mug cradled between my hands. My phone buzzed once on the table beside me, screen lighting up in a discreet glow. I caught a flash of the subject line before flipping it face down, escrow complete. Deed delivered. The words burned in the corner of my mind, a silent truth I wasn't ready to share, not yet. I pressed my thumb along the rim of the mug, the rough edge of the yellow tape, scraping my skin, and let the motion anchor me, as Calder leaned forward in his chair, elbows planted on the table, like a foreman about to announce a verdict. "You need to stop pretending," he said, his voice carrying more force than volume, deliberate and practiced. "Sell whatever scraps you're holding on to. Move back in here. Work under me. Learn some structure, some actual discipline, and finally understand how stability works. It's your only shot, Elliot, before everyone stops wondering what happened to you and just decides you're a lost cause." The words hung there, heavy, as the fire's smoke curling upward in the hearth. I looked toward my parents, hoping for even a flicker of protest, but Lowell avoided my eyes, his fingers fussing with the folded napkin on his lap, and Greta pressed her lips together, her gaze fixed on a spot somewhere near her untouched pie. Around us, the relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, murmuring low, their spoons scraping against plates, as though the sound could fill the silence. Calder's words left behind. Ophelia, ever precise, dabbed the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin before speaking. "And let's not ignore the elephant in the room," she said smoothly. "The PTA's been whispering, Elliot, about how someone of your means can't even be bothered to contribute a cent to the school fundraiser. People are starting to notice, and frankly, it's embarrassing for all of us." Her diamond bracelet flicked in the lamplight as she set her napkin down, the subtle glint drawing eyes as surely as her words did. A few relatives coughed awkwardly, their glances flitting between Calder and me, none daring to speak. The only consistent sound was the low, measured tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, each second stretching longer than the last. I felt my grip tighten around the mug, the ceramic warm against my palms, but trembling slightly as my hands began to shake. Heat crept up my neck, not from the fire, but from the simmering mix of humiliation and anger building just beneath my skin. I could feel the words rising sharp and pointed, ready to spill. Years of quiet patience, of letting them think they understood me, were about to crack wide open. My chest tightened, the mug's taped handle digging into my finger, daring me to lash out. Then Samuel's voice echoed in my head, steady and measured from our meeting just months ago. Actions, not anger. Timing is everything. The words cut through the noise like a cool wind. I drew in a breath, deep and slow, and forced my shoulders to settle. My fingers relaxed their chokehold on the mug, easing into a steadier grip. I tilted my head down, staring into the dark swirl of coffee like it might absorb the tension. The grandfather clock chimed 9, a deep resonant note that seemed to still the faint murmurs around the table. I let the sound settle over me, felt its weight, and sat there silently as Calder leaned back in his chair, mistaking my calm for resignation. My eyes traced the curve of the clock's brass pendulum, each swing deliberate, reminding me to wait. Just a little longer. Across the room, the muted television flickered. The football game that had been droning in the background all evening cut to a commercial break, the anchor's voice cutting through the muffled commentary. Coming up next, he set his tone bright and practiced. An $8 million estate changes hands right here in Austin, details after the break. The sound drew a brief pause from the table. Calder's brow furrowed, and Ophelia's fork stilled mid-air. No one spoke, but the faint hum of the grandfather clock and the soft crackle of the fire filled the space, carrying the unspoken question that lingered in the air. I sipped from my mug, the warmth sliding down my throat, and kept my eyes on the television screen as the anchor's voice faded into another commercial. I didn't say a word, not yet. I rose from my chair slowly, the wood creaking under the weight of the moment as every head in the room turned toward me. The soft hum of murmured whispers faded until only the faint crackle from the dying fire and the low tick of the grandfather clock remained. My hand slipped into the inside pocket of my jacket fingertips, grazing the familiar texture of the leather folder. Inside, the brass key rested like an anchor, its weight steady, cooling my palm as I drew it out and placed it atop the table. The folder landed with a muted thud, the sound drawing a ripple of confusion from those around me, their eyes darting between the leather and my face. A soft buzz from my phone in my other hand caught my eye, a new email notification glowing across the screen for just a moment before fading. Cranford Scholarship Fund confirmed press release scheduled. The words lingered on the edge of my thoughts, a reminder of tomorrow, of something beyond this table and the scrutiny that had clung to me all night. I turned the phone face down beside the folder and let my gaze move slowly across the faces I'd grown up with, the people who, until this very moment, thought they had me all figured out. For the record, I said, my voice steady but low, I won't be needing that guest room. The sentence hung in the warm air, caught between the lamplight and the flicker of shadows stretching long against the dining room walls. The relatives lining the table exchanged glances, whispers starting at the far end, like a draft sneaking under a door. Calder shifted in his seat, his once broad posture shrinking slightly, his elbows sliding back from the table as his eyes fell to the folder. Ophelia's hands folded in her lap, fingers tightening until her knuckles paled. Lowell and Greta stared wide-eyed and glassy, their surprise silent but heavy. I rested one hand on the folder, the other brushing the brass key, as it clinked softly against the wood. This, I continued, nodding to the folder, is the deed to a home I closed on this week. $8 million. Paid in full. It's not a trophy, and it's not leverage. It's simply mine. And I wanted you all to know, not because I need your validation, but because I'm done letting you decide who I am. The words didn't come sharp or loud. They landed softly, firmly, the way a gavel settles on wood at the end of a case rather than at the start. I didn't gloat, didn't wave the papers like a banner. I simply laid them there, next to the key, letting their existence do the talking. I'll continue living where I live, driving what I drive, shopping where I shop. None of that changes because of this, and I won't be bankrolling anyone's expectations or indulging anyone's sudden respect. What I've built, I built quietly, deliberately. That won't change. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was dense, like the air itself had thickened. Calder's hand hovered over his wine glass fingers, curling around the stem so tightly the glass trembled. He didn't speak. Instead, he exhaled through his nose, slow and measured, before setting the glass down gently, the faintest clink breaking the stillness. Ophelia's gaze stayed fixed on the tablecloth, the practiced confidence in her posture softening into something smaller, less certain. Lowell blinked, his mouth opening and closing once, twice, as if testing the weight of words he couldn't quite form, while Greta's hand rose to rest lightly against her chest, her breath catching, as though she'd only just realized she'd been holding it. Around us, the relatives murmured in hushed tones, their voices little more than a current of sound threading through the tension. I stepped back from the table, letting the glow of the candles soften the edges of the moment. A wisp of smoke curled upward from one of the tapers, twisting and vanishing into the lamplight, a faint scent of wax drifting into the air. For the first time all evening, I felt the muscles in my shoulders loosen, the pressure in my chest easing as the weight I'd carried in silence for so long finally found its place. The room stayed quiet, save for the occasional shift of a chair or the whisper of fabric as someone crossed their arms. My phone buzzed again this time, not with an email, but a call. The name flashing on the screen drew the faintest, genuine smile to my lips. Samuel Holt. I swiped to answer, turning slightly away from the table as the warm glow of the room stretched long across the floor. Ready for tomorrow? Samuel's voice carried its usual calm, tinged with a hint of expectation. The kids are counting on you. I glanced back at the folder and the key on the table, then at the still faces of my family, their world adjusting around them in real time. Yeah, I said quietly, my voice low but certain. I'm ready. The courtyard smelled of cedar mulch and cold air, sharp enough to sting the inside of my nose as I stepped up to the low wooden podium. Strings of soft lights stretched overhead, weaving between the bare branches, their glow giving the winter night a kind of gentle warmth. Samuel stood beside me, hands folded behind his back, his scarf tucked neatly into his coat. He leaned just close enough to murmur, voice low enough for only me to hear. That key isn't for the house anymore. It's for what comes after. His words settled deep as I scanned the faces in front of me. Students bundled in scarves, their cheeks flushed from the chill, teachers with their hands wrapped around paper cups of steaming cocoa, a few parents and locals curious enough to stand near the back. And further beyond, just inside the circle of light, Calder and Ophelia stood side by side, not postured for dominance, not sneering or smirking, just watching subdued hands clasped in front of them. Their presence didn't needle me the way it might have a month ago. Tonight they were just part of the crowd, their shadows stretching long across the frosted grass. I rested both hands on the podium, feeling the wood's chill seep through my gloves, and let my voice carry steady into the crisp air. This school is where a lot of us first learned the meaning of opportunity, I began. My breath puffed out in faint clouds, illuminated by the overhead lights. It's where I learned often the hard way that what you build quietly can last longer than what you flaunt loudly. The Cranford Scholarship Fund isn't just money, it's a way to give that kind of quiet strength to the next generation so they don't have to fight quite as hard for their footing. There was no applause, not yet, and I didn't need it. I stepped aside as Samuel lifted the leather folder and brass key from a velvet-lined case on the table behind us. The same folder Calder had once waved in his office like it was trash, now sat polished under the lights, its surface gleaming softly. The key rested atop it, both encased in a glass display that caught the glow of the strings above, scattering tiny pinpricks of light across the podium and onto the snow-dusted ground. Samuel's voice, calm and even, carried over the murmurs.
"These aren't symbols of wealth," he said. "They're reminders of what can be built when you stop performing and start doing."
I caught Calder's gaze at that moment. He didn't flinch, didn't turn away. When the ceremony ended, the folding chairs squeaked and shifted as people gathered their coats, the crunch of gravel mixing with quiet conversations. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke from a nearby house, and the warm sugar of pastries someone had brought for the students. Calder lingered at the edge of the courtyard, Ophelia a few paces behind her, breath rising in slow clouds. He stepped forward, his shoes grinding softly against the grit, and extended his hand. His voice was low, almost uncertain.
"I misjudged you,"
he said each word, measured like he'd rehearsed it, and still wasn't sure how it would sound. For a long time. His grip was firm but not forceful when I took his hand. I didn't squeeze harder, didn't linger, just held it steady for a moment before letting go. The old tension between us felt thinner now, fragile but no longer cutting. As the last of the crowd drifted off, Samuel and I began to pack the few remaining items into his weathered canvas bag. The lights above us swayed gently in the cold wind, their glow flickering over the glinting glass case as we secured it for storage. Samuel slid his gloves on, glanced at me with that small, knowing smile of his, and said, "Tomorrow, same coffee house. Bring the watch." I nodded, tugging my coat tighter as a gust swept through the courtyard, carrying the smell of cedar and distant chimney smoke. The key and folder safely locked away in their case caught one last glimmer of light before we closed the lid. As we walked toward the dimly lit parking lot, the crunch of our steps on the frozen gravel, the only sound, I found myself glancing up at the pale winter stars and exhaling slowly. For the first time in a long time, the weight on my shoulders didn't feel like a burden at all. Sunlight poured through Holt's Coffee House, warming the scratched wooden table where my family finally sat together without tension. The smell of fresh muffins mixed with soft jazz and the hiss of the espresso machine turning the morning calm. Samuel's cracked pocket watch sat beside my coffee, glinting in the light, the brass key beside it, no longer secrets, just part of the table. Calder leaned forward, his voice quieter than usual. "What's next for you?" Ophelia listened silently, her usual edge gone. I took a sip of coffee and said, "More of the same, running the company, growing the scholarship fund. But my life stays as it is. No handouts, no new showpieces. Just me." Lowell nodded. Greta smiled softly, and for once, nobody argued. Samuel broke the moment with a laugh, recalling a zoning meeting fiasco from years ago. Even Calder chuckled, the sound genuine. The tension melted into something that felt almost normal. I glanced at the watch and key catching the sun, feeling a quiet sense of closure. The barista called Elliot your usual to go. I pocketed the watch and key stood and looked once at my family, still talking easily. Duty calls, I said with a small smile, heading for the counter. Outside, the winter sunlight spilled across the street, bright and open, as I stepped into it without a shadow at my back. The morning light outside the coffee house lingered in my mind, catching on the mended pocket watch and brass key that now felt like steady companions rather than secrets. They reminded me that what's whole doesn't have to shine, and what's cracked can still hold meaning if we choose to keep carrying it. I've learned that peace isn't about proving anyone wrong. It's about knowing who you are, forgiving what can be forgiven, and standing firm on what can't. Sometimes bridges break, so we can discover which ones deserve rebuilding. If you've ever found a second chance in a way you didn't expect, what did it teach you? Share your story. I'd like to hear it.